You learn to smell fear before you see it. 23 years I've walked the hunting paths between stars, and the stench still catches me off guard. Not the obvious terror that pours off a cornered deserter when my boots start echoing down the corridor to their hideout. That kind of fear is almost clean, honest in its way. Sharp sweat, ragged breath, the body's simple admission that death has found it. No, the fear I mean is older than that, deeper. It seeps out of forgotten hab blocks and clings to the recycled air of derelict stations, pooling in the places where civilization pretends it still has authority. It's the collective dread of a species that knows, somewhere in its animal brain, that it is prey. My name is Veyron Lokak. I am a sanctioned bounty hunter, licensed by the Adeptus Arbits to pursue fugitives beyond the reach of conventional law. For more than 2 decades, I've dragged the lost, the damned, and the merely stupid back to face imperial justice. I've walked through underhive cesspits where the air burns your lungs, tracked heretic scum across asteroid fields so cold your breath freezes inside your mask, and cornered mutant abominations in places where even the Emperor's light struggles to reach. This is not a tale of glory. There are no heroes in the hunting trade, only survivors, and those who end up feeding the corpse grinders. I tell you this because tonight, sitting in my cramped quarters aboard a merchant hauler bound for the Kixis sector, I keep thinking about a contract I took 6 months ago. A simple retrieval, they called it. Tracked down a rogue tech adept who had absconded with classified data from a forge shrine on Metallica 7. Standard rate, minimal risk, clean extraction expected within 10 solar days. I should have known better. In this business, the moment someone tells you a job is simple, you can be certain it will try to kill you in ways you haven't yet learned to imagine. The Vox came in while I was finishing paperwork from my previous hunt. A deserter captain who'd tried to sell his regiment's ammunition reserves to orc freebooters. The fool hadn't even bothered to cover his tracks properly. 3 days of shipping manifests and bribe trails, and I found him in a gambling den on Scintilla's 3rd level, drunk on Amasec and convinced he was untouchable. He wept when I locked the restraint collar around his neck. They always weep. Then the new contract arrived through the proper channels. Mechanicus seal, correct authorization codes, payment guaranteed by the Forge Masters themselves. The target was designated Magos Biologist Keth 472, though I suspected that wasn't the name his mother gave him. Tech adepts rarely keep their birth names once they begin replacing flesh with sacred machinery. The file described him as a mid-level researcher specializing in biomechanical augmentation, assigned to catalog and analyze xenotech artifacts recovered from the Jericho Reach Crusade. 3 weeks before the contract reached me, Keth 472 had failed to report for his scheduled data upload. When security teams breached his laboratory, they found it stripped clean, not merely empty. Stripped. Every cogitator, every servo skull, every blessed candle, removed with surgical precision. The only thing left behind was a small heap of organic matter on the central examination table, later identified as roughly 12 kilograms of human brain tissue. The trail led to Vaxton's Landing, a Freeport station orbiting a dead world in the Coronis expanse. Vaxton's was the kind of place where imperial authority existed only as long as it could pay for dock space, haven for rogue traders, smugglers, and worse. The perfect place for a heretic to disappear. I took the contract. Looking back, I realized that was my first mistake. Not the job itself, though it would cost me enough. My real mistake was believing the file they handed me. Mid-level researcher, minimal augmentation, unlikely to resist capture. I'd hunted tech adepts before. Most were scholars who panicked at the first taste of real violence. Their mechanical limbs more liability than advantage when things turned ugly. I expected a frightened academic hiding in a maintenance tunnel, clutching stolen data slates and praying to the machine god for deliverance. What I found instead followed me into sleepless nights for months. The journey to Vaxton's Landing took 18 days aboard a charter freighter whose captain asked no questions and expected none answered. I used the time to review what I had and prepare my equipment. Lockaxe tools of the trade, a modified hell gun with extended power cells, a shock maul for close work, restraint collars rated for everything from feral humans to minor demons, a portable Auspex scanner, and enough counterseptic to sterilize a small plague outbreak. Standard hunter's kit, reliable. Proven, I also carried something less standard. Wrapped in blessed oils, etched with protective wards, and sealed inside a lead-lined case that never left my side was a digital weapon of Jokero manufacture. Alien technology, and therefore heretical by its very nature, but salvaged legally from a Xenos raider and sanctified by an Ordo Xenos Inquisitor for use against the Imperium's enemies. It looked like nothing more than a simple ring. Activated, it could disintegrate organic matter down to the molecular level. I'd used it only twice in my career, both times against targets that conventional weapons could not meaningfully harm. I did not expect to need it for simple retrieval. Vaxton's Landing appeared in my viewport like a cancerous growth against the stars, a sprawling mass of docking arms, habitat modules, and industrial complexes that had accreted over centuries. No plan, no oversight. Just metal and desperation welded together by whoever had the resources and audacity to claim a piece of the void. The station's population drifted between 50 and 80,000 souls, depending on trading seasons and imperial crackdowns in neighboring sectors. Docking fees alone could bankrupt a minor noble house, but the Mechanicus had provided generous expense accounts. I moored my shuttle in Bay 94, a rust-stained cavity that reeked of promethium fumes and unwashed bodies, and began the tedious work of bribing my way through station security. 3 dock workers, 2 customs officials, 1 very accommodating administrative clerk. After that, I had a visitor's pass and a rough sense of where to start. Vaxton's had no central records office, no unified security net, no convenient cogitator database where I could cross-reference arrivals against my quarry's description. Finding someone here meant doing it the old way, talking to people, following rumors, and waiting for greed to outgrow discretion. I started in the merchant quarter, where respectable traders did business beneath the watchful eyes of armed security teams. The first 3 days gave me nothing but closed doors and suspicious stares. Nobody had seen a tech adept matching Keth 472's description. Nobody remembered unusual shipments of laboratory equipment. Nobody knew anything about anything, and they were perfectly content to keep it that way. In a place like Vaxton's Landing, information is currency. Strangers rarely have enough credit to buy it. On the 4th day, I found the body. It floated in a maintenance shaft between levels 12 and 13, wedged behind a coolant recycling unit where janitorial servitors seldom bothered to go. Human male, roughly 30 standard years, with the scarification and cranial implants that marked him as a tech adept initiate. Someone had killed him with precision, a single lass bolt to the back of the head. Clean, professional. His sacred oils had been drained, his mechanical components had been carefully removed. The flesh left behind to bloat and rot in stagnant air. The local security chief met me at the scene, a grizzled ex-guardsman named Torin, wearing the weary resignation of a man who'd seen too much death to be surprised by it. "Found him this morning," Torin said, lighting a low stick with hands that trembled only slightly. Servitor reported a blockage in the coolant lines. Poor bastard's been here at least a week, maybe more. I knelt beside the corpse and studied the wound, the methodical extraction of augmentics. This wasn't common thievery. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing, what components were valuable, and how to pull them without damaging surrounding tissue. "Any idea who he was?" I asked. Torin shrugged. "Could be anyone. We get a lot of tech types through here. Usually keep their heads down, keep their business private. Most don't register with station security unless they plan on staying." I activated my Auspex and ran a preliminary biological scan. The readouts made me pause. This body showed signs of extensive genetic modification, far beyond standard junior augmentations. Muscle density increased by 40%. Bone structure reinforced with metallic composites. Neural pathways laced with synthetic synapses that would cost a small fortune on any civilized world. This wasn't a random initiate. This was someone important. Someone whose death would be noticed by people far more dangerous than petty thieves. I rose and sealed my scanner. "Torin," I said, "I need your arrival logs for the past month. Every ship, every passenger manifest, every cargo declaration." His eyes narrowed. "That kind of information doesn't come free, Hunter. I produced a credit stick loaded with Mechanicus funds. How much for full cooperation and complete discretion?" Torin looked at the credit stick, then at the corpse drifting in the maintenance shaft, then back at me. "For that amount," he muttered, "you can have my grandmother's recipe for grok steak." "Follow me." The station security office occupied a cramped compartment on level 8, wedged between a reclamation plant and a shrine to the god emperor that had seen better centuries. Banks of cogitators hummed and clicked, processing the endless data stream that kept Vaxtons functional. Passenger manifests, cargo schedules, maintenance reports, incident logs, the digital heartbeat of a community perpetually balanced on the edge of anarchy. Torin's files confirmed my suspicion. The dead tech adept had arrived aboard the merchant vessel Faithful Prophet 3 weeks earlier, traveling under the name Magos Biologis, Keth 472. My quarry was already dead. I stared at the manifest, turning the implications over in my head. If the real Keth 472 had been murdered shortly after arrival, then who had spent the last 3 weeks stripping his laboratory clean? Who had the knowledge to remove every piece of equipment without triggering security protocols? And what had they done with the stolen xenotech data? "Torin," I said, scrolling deeper. "Show me every tech adept who's docked here in the past month." His fingers danced across the keys. 7 names populated the screen. 6 had departed within days. Business done, ships already beyond my reach. The 7th name made my blood run cold. Magos Explorator Vexthan. Arrival, 5 days after Keth 472's murder. Status, still on station. I'd never heard of Vexthan, but I didn't need to. Magos Explorator wasn't a title handed out lightly. Those were the Mechanicus' most elite xenotech specialists, individuals trusted with technology so dangerous that lesser minds couldn't even grasp its existence. If a Magos Explorator was involved, then my simple retrieval had just become something else entirely. "I need everything you have on Vexthan," I told Torin. "Where he's staying, who he's met, what equipment he brought aboard." Torin's expression tightened. "Hunter, I've been cooperative, but you're asking about dangerous people now. Mechanicus adepts don't appreciate scrutiny, especially from outsiders. I doubled the value on the credit stick. Then we'll be discreet." Over the next hours, Torin's digging painted a picture that felt wrong in a way I couldn't quite quantify. Vexthan had arrived aboard a ship registered to the Adeptus Mechanicus, yet it bore no Forge World identification marks. His documentation was immaculate, authorizations properly sealed, everything in order. Too in order, too clean, too convenient, like a story engineered to survive casual scrutiny. Dock worker reports added more unease. Sealed containers marked with biohazard warnings. Equipment pods that hummed with barely contained energy. And strangest of all, a series of life support pods transferred directly from ship to a private laboratory complex in the station's industrial sector. Life support pods on a vessel allegedly here for xenotech research. I left Torin's office with more questions than answers, but at least I had a destination. The laboratory complex sat in Section K7, a maze of industrial facilities where legitimate research rented wall space alongside endeavors that preferred to avoid imperial oversight. Getting there meant walking through Vaxton's underbelly, past workshops where tech heretics peddled forbidden modifications and black market dealers traded in weapons that had no business existing. The air thickened with incense and machine oil, punctuated by the rhythmic chant of tech priests murmuring their mysteries. Imperial authority held little sway down here. Mechanicus influence carved out pockets of quasi-independence that lived in the shadows of official doctrine. I found the complex behind heavy blast doors and warning placards proclaiming the dangers of unauthorized entry, radiation hazards, biological contamination, mimetic warfare protocols. The kind of signage meant to turn any sensible person around. Naturally, I pressed the entry chime and waited. The door opened. The figure standing there barely qualified as human. Vex Than was nearly 3 meters tall, his original biological form so extensively altered that only the vaguest outline of his species remained. Multiple arms ending in specialized manipulator claws protruded from his torso. Sensor arrays and data ports clustered around what might once have been a face. When he spoke, it came through a Vox grill embedded in his throat. Each word precisely modulated, stripped of anything resembling emotion. "You are not expected," he said. I produced my bounty hunter credentials and held them up for his optics to parse. "Veyron Lokak, sanctioned hunter. I'm investigating the disappearance of Magos biologist Keth 472. I believe you may have information relevant to my inquiry." Vex Than studied the credentials with the patient thoroughness of a machine weighing data. Seconds passed. Then he spoke again. "Keth 472 is deceased. His biological functions ceased 1.7 weeks ago due to cranial trauma inflicted by an unknown assailant. His remains were recovered in Maintenance Sector 1213 by station security personnel. This information is public record." "Yes," I said. "But someone has been using his identity since his death. Someone with intimate knowledge of his research and access to his work. I think you know who that someone is." The Magos explorator's limbs clicked softly as he processed. Past him, I caught brief glimpses of the interior, gleaming surfaces, humming machinery, and something else that made my skin crawl. Movement, organic movement, inside containers that should have held only equipment and data. "Your investigation has reached its conclusion," Vex Than said. "Keth 472 is dead. His research materials have been recovered and are being analyzed by appropriately qualified personnel. Your services are no longer required." He began to close the door. I planted my boot against the frame. "I don't think so," I said, drawing my hellgun in one smooth motion. "My contract specifies retrieval of the target and any stolen materials. Until I confirm those materials are in the hands of legitimate Imperial authority, my work isn't finished." Vex Than's optics settled on my weapon with the detached curiosity of a predator judging prey. "You're making a grave error in judgment, Hunter. My work here is sanctioned by authorities far above your clearance level. Interference will result in severe consequences for your person and your continued licensure." "Then you won't mind if I take a quick look," I said, "and verify everything is properly documented." For several heartbeats he didn't move. When he finally stepped aside, every instinct I had screamed that I was walking into a trap. I entered anyway. In this business, you learn to trust your skills over your fear, or you die before you ever collect a pension. The laboratory was a shrine to the intersection of flesh and machine, a place where the boundary between organic and mechanical had been deliberately smeared beyond recognition. Specimen containers lined the walls, each filled with biological samples suspended in nutrient solutions that glowed with unnatural color. Some held recognizably human organs, hearts, brains, limbs, still pulsing with artificial life. Others contained things that might once have been human, but had been altered so profoundly that what they had started as was no longer something I could state with certainty. But it was the central examination table that seized my attention. Strapped to its surface lay something that had once been human, unmistakably so, despite everything done to it. A young woman, perhaps 20 standard years old, though the sheer volume of surgical alteration made certainty impossible. Her skull had been opened and sealed more than once. I could see glimpses of living brain tissue laced through with metallic filaments, as if thought itself had been stitched to wire. Her arms ended in mechanical manipulators, matching the same specialized claws I'd seen attached to Vex Than. And then I noticed her eyes. They were open, tracking me. Not the blind twitch of reflex, but the focused attention of a mind still present behind the damage. She was alive, and she was trying to speak. "Fascinating specimen," Vex Than said, gliding to the table with the casual tone of a man commenting on weather. A volunteer from the station's underhive population, addictive tendencies, criminal record. No family connections to complicate her absence. She has proven remarkably adaptable to the enhancement procedures. I kept my hell gun trained on him, but my gaze stayed on the girl. The surgical seams were fresh, days old, not weeks. Whatever this was, it was recent, ongoing, and it reeked of secrecy rather than sanctioned protocol. "What kind of enhancement?" I asked. "Cognitive amplification through direct neural interface with xenotech cognitive matrices," Vex Than replied, with something dangerously close to pride. "The subject's mental capacity has increased by approximately 300%. Emotional responses have been regulated to prevent psychological collapse. Preliminary results suggest human consciousness can be merged with alien thought patterns, if integration is managed correctly." The woman made a sound, wet, strangled, like her throat had forgotten how to form language. I stepped closer, trying to read her lips, trying to make sense of the rasping effort. "Help me." The words were mangled by whatever had been done to her vocal apparatus, but the meaning landed like a blade. This wasn't a volunteer. This was a victim. I turned back to Vex Than, finger tightening on the trigger. "This isn't sanctioned research," I said. "This is HearTech activity, pure and simple. You're under arrest for violation of Imperial biotech regulation, unlawful human experimentation, and murder." His mechanical limbs spread slightly, too smoothly to be surrender, too deliberate to be fear. "You do not comprehend the significance of this work," he said. "The xenotech recovered from the Jericho Reach contains cognitive enhancement beyond human comprehension. But comprehension can be achieved. Integration can be accomplished. The weakness of flesh can be transcended through synthesis with superior alien intellects." He spoke as if reading scripture. By advancing human evolution through controlled experimentation, the subjects experience discomfort. Yes, but their sacrifice enables breakthroughs that will benefit our entire species. Is that not a worthy trade? I'd heard that tone before. The galaxy is crowded with monsters who rap atrocity in the language of necessity. "The only trade here," I said, "is your freedom for these victims' lives. Step away from the table. Put your manipulators where I can see them." Vex Than tilted his head, almost curious. "You still do not understand," he said. "I am not the architect of these experiments. I am merely another subject." The laboratory lights dimmed. Something shifted behind the specimen containers. Slow, patient movement. Not the scuttle of servitors or the hum of machinery. Something alive. Something waiting. The real Magos explorator, Vex Than, died 2 months ago on Research Station Prometheus 6. The thing wearing his form continued. His knowledge, his memories, his authorized clearances, preserved, integrated, installed into a more capable vessel. My mouth went dry. "As will yours, Hunter. As will all who encounter the gift we bring." The shadows gathered themselves into a shape that hurt to look at. Not because it was merely large, but because my mind refused to accept what my eyes reported. Tentacles that bent through angles that shouldn't exist. Surfaces that caught light wrong, as if geometry itself had been rewritten. Beneath it all, an intelligence so alien that proximity made my teeth ache. I opened fire. Hellgun beams struck the thing and vanished, snuffed out, absorbed into its impossible structure as if the energy had never existed. Second shot. Third, same result. Conventional weapons were useless, but I hadn't come unprepared for the unconventional. I rolled behind a specimen container, snapped the lead-lined case open, and slid the Jokairo ring onto my finger. It warmed against my skin, alive in the way only Xeno's craft can be, as if it recognized the threat in front of it. The creature flowed across the lab floor toward my position. I rose from cover and fired. The digital beam hit center mass, and where my last fire had been swallowed, this cut. The disintegration started cleanly, unmaking matter at its foundation. The Jokairo weapon carved through alien flesh like a blade through parchment. The thing screamed. Not into the air, not into my ears. The sound bypassed both and rang through my bones, vibrating teeth and marrow and memory. But it didn't collapse. Instead, it changed. Its impossible angles folded inward, condensing, reshaping into forms my sanity could tolerate. Tentacles drew into limbs, unnameable surfaces smoothed into skin. The writhing mass became human proportions, human posture, human expression, and within moments it wore my face. "Better?" it asked, using my voice. I kept the ring trained on its chest, but dread crawled up my spine. The disintegration effect had stopped. Whatever damage I'd done was already healing. "What are you?" I demanded. "We are synthesis," it replied, studying its stolen form with quiet satisfaction. The merger of human ingenuity with cognitive structures liberated from the Jericho reach. Your species adapts remarkably, but lacks the framework for true transcendence. We provide that framework by possessing people, by improving them. It gestured toward the examination table where the young woman still lay strapped down, eyes wide, breath shallow. The original consciousness is preserved, enhanced, integrated into a collective spanning multiple realms of existence. Death becomes irrelevant. Pain becomes temporary. The limitations of individual perspective are transcended through shared experience. Its gaze flicked to the girl. Observe the process in its early stages. Physical modification precedes mental integration. Neural pathways are mapped and expanded. Foreign cognitive patterns are introduced gradually to prevent collapse. Within days, she will perceive thoughts beyond human comprehension. "She asked for help," I said. "She does not yet understand the gift," Synthesis replied. "Fear is natural at the beginning. Fear passes. Understanding remains." I was running out of time and options. The ring had been effective against its original form, but this configuration was more resilient. Worse, I could hear movement elsewhere in the lab now. Other steps, other voices. Not one monster, many. And the false Vex Than, still near the doorway, no longer moved with machine precision. Subtle shifts rippled through him as if something inside was loosening, becoming fluid, becoming alive. Whatever controlled these entities was strengthening its hold. "Your resistance is admirable," the false Vex Than said, "but futile. We have established multiple nodes of influence throughout this station. Security personnel, dock workers, merchants, even some of your imperial authorities. Synthesis spreads through contact, through conversation, through simple proximity." "How many?" I snarled. "As many as required," it said. "Vaxton's landing will serve as a staging ground. Trade routes will carry influence to dozens of worlds. Within a generation, synthesis will be indistinguishable from natural human evolution." The implication hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't isolated Hirtech indulgence. This was invasion, systematic infiltration designed to rot the Imperium from the inside. The creature wearing my face smiled with my mouth. "You begin to understand the scope of our achievement. But understanding brings responsibility. You cannot be permitted to carry this knowledge beyond these walls, unless you join us willingly. That's not going to happen. Then you will join unwillingly." The remaining lights died. Darkness swallowed the laboratory, broken only by the eerie glow from specimen tanks. Footsteps approached from multiple directions, the careful, coordinated movement of predators closing on trapped prey. My Hellgun was nearly useless in this dark, but the ring had its own targeting senses. I activated its enhanced detection and started moving toward what I hoped was still the exit. The first attacker came from my left, a shadow among shadows that might once have been human. I fired blind. The ring answered with a silent beam. I heard the unmistakable hiss and collapse of matter coming apart, and I kept moving. A second figure emerged near a bank of cogitators, recognizable now as one of Torrent's security officers. The ring erased him as efficiently as it had the first. But for every enemy I removed, two more seemed to step into place. They moved with unnatural coordination, shepherding me away from the exit and deeper into the maze of equipment and specimen containers. They weren't just attacking. They were guiding, steering me toward a destination I hadn't chosen. The destination revealed itself as a surgical chamber equipped with restraint systems disturbingly similar to the ones holding the young woman. Mechanical arms hung from the ceiling like metallic spiders, ending in surgical implements. Monitoring banks lined the walls, their displays tracking biological functions I didn't recognize. The creature wearing my face stood waiting in the center. "The process will be less traumatic if you cooperate," it said. "Resistance only prolongs discomfort." I raised the ring again, only to feel my hand tremble with exhaustion and adrenaline. The power cell was draining fast. 3 shots left, maybe 4 if the machine's mercy held. Then it would be nothing but alien jewelry on my finger. "I've got a better idea," I said, and triggered the laboratory's emergency fire suppression. Vaxton's landing was built to Imperial safety standards, which meant layers of redundant systems designed to prevent catastrophe. Foam flooding, chemical retardants, compartmental seals, and, in worst-case containment, atmospheric venting. The effect was immediate. Klaxons shrieked. Emergency lighting snapped on, washing the chamber in harsh red. Blast doors slammed shut, sealing the lab from the rest of the station. And the vents opened. Air tore toward vacuum with a roar that made speech impossible. Loose bodies and unsecured equipment were yanked toward the venting systems with brutal force. I caught flashes of flailing silhouettes, heard impacts, heard the wet finality of mass meeting machinery. But the creature wearing my face remained standing. Its impossible anatomy didn't care about pressure, didn't care about breath. "Clever," it said, somehow audible through the howling gale, but ultimately pointless. "We do not require atmosphere." I didn't wait. Fighting the torrent, I lunged for a maintenance hatch I'd noticed earlier. The ring's targeting overlay guided me through chaos, highlighting handholds, threats, routes. 3 shots left, maybe 2. I had to make them count. The hatch spilled me into a service corridor connecting the complex to the station's primary life support systems. Not an escape, not yet, but a sliver of distance, a pause long enough to think. I sealed the hatch behind me and tried to breathe, though the air tasted like metal and panic. The immediate danger was contained, barely. The larger problem remained. Infiltration. They'd been here for weeks, months, building influence that might reach every layer of authority. I couldn't trust anyone, couldn't call for help. Couldn't even be certain my own thoughts were untouched. The service corridor stretched into darkness both ways under feeble emergency lamps. I chose a direction at random and walked, hoping to find either another exit or a communications array I could use to scream a warning into the void. What I found instead was proof that I was already too late. The corridor walls were veined with organic growth, a fibrous mat that pulsed with its own rhythm, as if the station itself had begun to grow new flesh. It spread slowly, steadily, into infrastructure and conduit, not infiltration. Infection. My auspex confirmed what my instincts already knew. The growth radiated low-level psychic emissions, subtle mental pressure that would warp anyone who lingered near it. The longer someone stayed on Vaxton's landing, the more susceptible they became. I had been here 6 days. How much of my decision-making was mine? How much had been guided, nudged, by an intelligence that fed on thought? My investigation had led me exactly where they wanted. My resistance had been fierce, and yet, in the end, ineffective. Even my escape felt almost too possible. Was I hunting them, or had they been hunting me the entire time? The corridor ended at a junction with 3 routes. Straight ahead, the central power core. Left, docking bays and my shuttle. Right, the communications center and the chance to call for help. I turned right and found Torin blocking the passage. Only it wasn't Torin anymore. Not truly. His posture was wrong. Too precise, too controlled. His expression held that same dead modulation I'd heard from the false Vex Than. "You have caused considerable disruption," he said. "The laboratory contained months of irreplaceable research. The specimens you destroyed represented significant investment." "Good," I said, raising the ring. "I was hoping to be more than an inconvenience. Your resistance serves no purpose. Synthesis is inevitable. Your species will be improved, whether you cooperate or not." Torin began walking toward me with the inexorable patience of a machine executing code. I backed away and realized the corridor behind me was no longer empty. Another figure approached from that direction, wearing the face of a dock worker I'd bribed days earlier. 2 enemies, 2 shots left. The math was simple, and it did not favor me. "Why Vaxton's Landing?" I demanded, buying seconds with words while my mind scrambled for options. "Why not an isolated station, an empty moon?" "Population density and transport connections," Torin replied without hesitation. "This station processes tens of thousands of transients, merchants, travelers, pilgrims, refugees. Each is a potential vector. Within 1 standard year, our influence will extend to hundreds of worlds. The Imperium will not notice until the change is complete. And the Imperial authorities? They will be the first to embrace synthesis," Torin said. "Administrative efficiency improves dramatically when individual agendas are subordinated to collective purpose. The Imperium is chaotic, wasteful, internally conflicted. The Imperium we create will be unified, focused, inevitable." The dock worker closed to within 10 meters. Torin was 15 out, one hand resting casually near his sidearm. Both of them pacing, coordinating, giving me no clean opening. I chose. I fired at Torin. The beam struck center mass, and the disintegration began. Matter unthreading, collapsing into nothingness. Torin glanced down at the spreading damage with mild interest. "Fascinating weapon," he said, even as his torso began to break apart. "Jokai manufacture. If I am not mistaken, we have encountered similar devices in other regions. Quite effective against conventional biological targets." He kept walking, even as the disintegration ate into chest and shoulder. "Unfortunately," he said, "we are no longer entirely biological." The dock worker reached me first, moving too fast, too coordinated, hands snapping for my weapon. I twisted away and fired my last shot point-blank into his face. His head vanished, unmade in an instant. But his body didn't stop. It kept moving with mechanical certainty, hands closing around my throat as if the missing head was irrelevant to the command driving the limbs. The ring was dead weight now. I dropped it, drew my shock maul, and drove the crackling tip into his chest. High voltage tore through the dock worker's frame. The shock maul screamed, dumping current straight into whatever passed for his nervous system now. He didn't fall. If anything, his grip tightened. "Electrical disruption is ineffective against synthetic neural networks," Torin observed. His voice no longer sounded like it came from a man with lungs and meat behind his ribs. The disintegration had eaten most of his torso away, leaving a cage of sparking mechanisms where organs should have been. He walked forward like a machine that had decided mass was optional. "We learned to compensate for such attacks during our initial encounters with Imperial forces." The headless dock worker lifted me off the deck plating with impossible strength. Fingers closed around my windpipe with methodical precision. The world narrowed. Black spots bloomed at the edges of my vision as oxygen vanished. I did the only thing left. I triggered the maul's overload. The power cell dumped everything it had into a single brutal burst. Sparks erupted. Synthetic components cooked and failed in a cascade of electrical fire. At last, the grip slackened. The body's motor function stuttered and died. I hit the floor hard, gulping air, one hand clamped to my bruised throat. Torin kept coming. Half a body, no real chest, no hesitation. Crude, he said, but effective. However, your weapons are now depleted, and you have nowhere to retreat. Submit willingly, and we will ensure your consciousness remains largely intact during integration. I dragged myself upright and raised my hell gun anyway, fully aware it was theater. Sometimes defiance is all you have left, even when it can't change the ending. Torin stopped just outside my weapon's optimal range. Consider what you have witnessed, Hunter, he said. A dying species offered transcendence, consciousness freed from the limits of individual flesh, unity of purpose that ends conflict and waste. Is this not preferable to your endless grinding war? I forced words through the damage in my throat. Unity without choice isn't unity, I rasped. It's slavery. Choice is an illusion that breeds chaos, he replied. Your Imperium knows this. That is why it enforces hierarchy and obedience. We simply extend the principle to its logical conclusion. He raised his last pistol with mechanical precision, sighting my center mass. At this range, even a poor shot would disable me long enough for capture and conversion. Your resistance ends here. The shot came from behind him. Torin's head vanished in an instant, shattered by a high-powered round. Synthetic fluid and sparking electronics burst outward. For several seconds, his body remained upright, trying to compensate through reflex and secondary systems, before it finally toppled forward and crashed to the corridor floor. A figure stepped from the shadows beyond the junction, weapon still trained, posture steady. Human, female, around 30 standard years. Dressed in the practical kit of a professional soldier, her movements were disciplined and natural. No inhuman timing, no machine's smooth precision. Either she was the best infiltrator I'd ever seen, or she was clean. Veyron Lockhack, she asked. I nodded. My throat wouldn't cooperate. Inquisitor Valeria Kane, Ordo Xenos. She produced identification my trained eye recognized immediately. Authentic, the kind you didn't fake unless you wanted to die screaming. An Inquisitor, of course. Nothing in my life was allowed to stay simple. I've been tracking this infection for 3 months, Kane said, advancing while keeping her weapon angled toward the dark behind me. You stumbling into their operation has complicated my work. How much do you know? I croaked. Enough. Her gaze flicked over the corridor. The bodies, the half-dissolved remains. We're dealing with a cognitive parasite of xenotech origin. Something recovered from the Jericho Reach that learned to inhabit and rewrite human neural tissue. Initial infection vector appears to be direct contact with preserved alien brain matter. She crouched beside Torin's ruined shell, studying the exposed components with the cold patience of a surgeon. The modification follows a pattern. Biological systems are replaced gradually with synthetic substitutes. The host consciousness is pulled into a collective network. Full conversion takes roughly 2 weeks, depending on mental resistance and physical condition. How many? I asked. Unknown. My surveillance suggests at least 30% of the station's permanent population, possibly more. Conversion is subtle. Most compromised individuals pass casual inspection until late stages. She stood and swept a handheld auspex across me with clinical efficiency. Clean, she said. No synthetic neural implants, no cognitive modification. Your exposure has been too brief for integration. I didn't like the word brief in that sentence. I'd been breathing Vaxton's air for 6 days. Cain seemed to read the thought off my face. The atmosphere is contaminated, she said. Psychoactive spores derived from the original samples. Breathing them doesn't infect immediately, but it makes the mind more receptive. A preparatory stage softens psychological defenses. A cold, crawling realization settled into my gut. How much of what I'd done on this station had been my decision. How much had been gently guided by something that didn't need chains if it could just adjust a thought here, a fear there? "What's your plan?" I asked. Originally, Kane's tone was matter-of-fact. "Intelligence gathering, then exterminatus. Controlled orbital sterilization, cyclonic torpedoes, end the contamination before it spreads." I'd worked alongside Inquisitors before. Their mathematics was ruthless and often correct. But something about this situation felt incomplete, like a puzzle missing its most important piece. "Why haven't you already done it?" I managed. "Because Vaxton's was useful as bait," she said, "and because I needed to confirm the vector and the scope." Then her auspex chimed. Soft at first, then persistent. Multiple contacts, approaching, coordinated, closing in. Kane's head snapped up. "They know they've been discovered," she said. "Within hours, they'll start evacuating key nodes and materials to other sites. If we don't act now, this will spread throughout the sector." "I saw something in the lab," I said. "It implied a central intelligence, a primary node coordinating everything. If we find it, if we destroy the source." Kane paused, weighing the idea like a blade in her hand. "Even if such a node exists," she said, "locating it takes time we don't have." "Then we make time." Footsteps echoed closer from the junctions. Predators tightening the circle. Kane made her decision with the swift certainty that had probably kept her alive through decades of fighting things humanity was never meant to understand. "Very well," she said. "But we do this my way, with my resources, under my authority. If your theory fails, I will not hesitate to implement exterminatus protocols." "Understood." "Good," she said, turning. "Now follow me, and try not to get yourself killed. I have questions about your encounter with the primary intelligence, and I prefer my sources breathing when I interrogate them." We moved deeper into service corridors Kane had clearly mapped long before I arrived. She walked with fluid, practiced grace, someone who treated every junction like it might bite. Her equipment was top-grade Imperial issue, modified with components I didn't recognize, and some of it carried that subtle wrongness of sanctified xenotech, blessed heresy, permitted only because the alternative was worse. "Tell me about the laboratory," she said as we passed a junction that stank of solvents and human waste. "Everything you saw, everyone you spoke with, every detail." I gave it to her the way experience had taught me. Clinical, precise, stripped of emotion. The girl on the table, the claims of cognitive amplification, the thing that wore my face and called itself synthesis, the promise of transcendence, the threat of unwilling joining. Kane listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a data slate with practiced efficiency. "Interesting," she said when I finished. "Your description matches reports from other infection sites. Central intelligence offering transcendence while erasing individual consciousness. We've seen similar manifestations on 3 other worlds in the last year. This has happened before. The Jericho Reach Crusade recovered dozens of artifacts from a dead world," she said. "Most were mundane. Some were cognitive, designed to interact with organic neural tissue. Protocol demands containment under controlled conditions. Unfortunately, certain research teams grew enthusiastic." She stopped at a sealed bulkhead, produced a compact bypass tool, and cycled the lock without triggering alarms. Direct exposure led to infection. Containment personnel compromised. 3 facilities required complete sterilization, but some infected escaped. The thought chilled me. Not a single outbreak, an evolving enemy learning from every failure. "It adapts," I said. "Yes," Kane replied. "It learns." We emerged into a maintenance bay servicing Vaxton's primary communications array. Vox banks hummed and crackled with interstellar traffic. Relay systems linked this station to the wider Imperium, dozens of nearby worlds. A constant artery of words and orders and prayers. Tech adepts worked the relays, or what used to be tech adepts. Their movements carried the same mechanical precision I'd seen in compromised bodies. And they weren't maintaining the array. They were changing it. Organic graphs pulsed against Imperial metal. Devices that mirrored the psychic emissions I'd detected in the corridors. "They're modifying the array," I whispered. Kane raised her rifle and peered through her scope. "Psychic amplification nodes," she said. "They're preparing to broadcast the infection beyond the station. Every incoming and outgoing transmission will carry cognitive spores to its destination. The implications hit like a hammer. If the Vox itself became the vector, the sector would fall in days." "How do we stop it?" I asked. "Explosives are direct," she said, "but they'd alert every compromised individual here. We need subtle." She activated her auspex again, mapping the alien additions, tracing power flow and signal structure. "There," she said, indicating a central mass that throbbed with greater intensity than the rest. "Primary control nexus. Disable it, and the modification network should shut down, temporarily." "And how do we reach it without fighting a dozen infected adepts?" Kane's mouth tightened into something that wasn't quite a smile. "We don't fight them," she said. "We join them." From her pack, she produced 2 devices resembling compact cogitator interfaces. Too refined, too purpose-built to be standard kit. "Cranial implants," she explained. "Designed to simulate the neural signatures of compromised individuals. Temporary psychic dampeners. They'll broadcast false collective signals while shielding your actual consciousness." I stared at them with undisguised reluctance. "You want to install alien tech in my brain." "Sanctified alien tech," she corrected, flat as a bolt gun. "Blessed and purified by the Ordo Xenos for infiltration work. Risk is minimal compared to the alternative, which is watching this spread while we hide and debate doctrine." I hated that she was right. If a few hours of sanctioned heresy could prevent sector-wide contamination, it was a price worth paying. The installation was quick and surprisingly clean. Kane's field training was surgical. She placed the devices with careful precision, avoiding critical pathways while ensuring signal propagation. Within minutes, I felt the subtle weight of something foreign brushing the edges of my awareness. "How do I know this isn't just infection wearing a mask?" I asked. "Because if I wanted you infected," Kane said, "I would have shot you when we met." She secured the last component and met my eyes. "The dampeners preserve your individual mind while translating you into their language. You'll look like the collective to casual scrutiny, without becoming it." We approached the bay from a service entrance that kept us hidden until the last moment. The compromised adepts continued their work, synchronized and indifferent. "Remember," Kane whispered. "Move like them, precise, purposeful, emotionless. Speak only if addressed. Keep answers brief and factual. The collective values efficiency." I nodded, then followed her into the bay, forcing my body into that measured cadence. The dampeners activated fully. A pressure settled against my consciousness. Vast, alien, searching. It felt like a hand pressing on glass, and it found only its own reflection. One of the nearest adepts looked up, augmetic eyes fixing on us with flat interest. "State purpose," it said. "Scheduled inspection of modification protocols," Kane replied in the same dead tone. "Authorization Gamma 77, TERS." The adept paused, processing. Data flickered behind its eyes. "Authorization confirmed," it said at last. "Proceed to primary nexus for evaluation." We walked deeper between banks of Vox equipment. Up close, the alien graphs were worse than I'd imagined. Organic precision married to Imperial steel with obscene intimacy. The primary nexus occupied the bay's center. A pulsing mass interfaced directly with the station's communication spine. It was beautiful in a way that made my stomach turn. Intelligent design aimed at malign purpose. "Sabotage requires timing," Kane whispered, producing a device that resembled a melter charge, but it radiated absence rather than heat. "A compact nullification field. This will disrupt the Nexus's control signals," she said, affixing it to the primary interface node. "Temporary. We'll have roughly 10 minutes to reach the communication center and transmit my authorization codes. If they recover faster, then we improvise." She set the activation delay, 30 seconds. We turned and began walking away at the same mechanical pace, every instinct screaming at us to run. 20 seconds. The adepts kept working, oblivious. 15. We reached the exit with a clear corridor ahead. 10. One adept turned toward the nexus as if sensing a subtle shift. 5. We stepped through the doorway and accelerated into a fast walk. Still controlled, still in character. Then the device activated with a sound like reality tearing. Every compromised individual on the station screamed in perfect unison. The psychic backlash slammed into us like a physical blow, even through the dampeners. My vision blurred. My knees threatened to fold as conflicting signals crashed through my nervous system. Kane staggered too, but less. Inquisitorial training held her together through things that would have broken most minds. "Move," she gasped, yanking me upright. "The collective is trying to re-establish control. We have minutes." Behind us, the station woke like a single predator. Coordinated movement surged through the corridors. Footsteps, the hum of charged energy weapons, the careful closing of a net. And we were standing at its center, racing the clock toward the only chance left to stop Vaxton's landing from becoming a plague carried on the Imperium's own words. They were coming, and they were coming with everything they had. The communications center sat 3 levels above the maintenance bay. Under normal conditions, you reached it through service lifts and emergency stairwells in 10 minutes. We didn't have 10 minutes. We had maybe 5 before the nullification effect collapsed, and probably less than that before our pursuers caught up. Cain moved with desperate efficiency, her inquisitorial authority overriding locks, codes, and elevator controls as we climbed through the station's superstructure. The psychic dampeners were failing under the strain of the collective trying to reassert contact. Whispers filled my skull, promises, threats, invitations that grew louder with every level we gained, like something pressing its mouth to my ear. "Almost there," Kayan said as we reached the communication center's outer checkpoint. "Hold position. Watch for pursuit. I transmit the authorization codes." The communications center was a temple to Imperial bureaucracy. Banks of Vox arrays, relay cogitators, data processing stacks that maintained contact with hundreds of worlds across the sector. In better times, it would have been staffed by dozens and layered in security. Now it was empty except for the 2 of us, and the rising chorus in our heads. Cain activated the primary array and began entering her codes, fingers dancing across control surfaces with practiced precision. The process felt endless. Each second stretched thin as the sound of pursuit drew closer in the corridors beyond. "Contact established," she said at last. "Destroyer, Righteous Fury, transmitting Exterminatus authorization." The Vox cracked with static as her signal jumped into the void. 3 hours out, she'd said earlier. 3 hours for a destroyer to reach firing position and launch cyclonic torpedoes that would reduce Vaxton's landing to constituent atoms. 3 hours for the infection to finish rewriting the communication system and seed itself across the sector. "There has to be another way," I said, checking my chronometer and hating the numbers I saw. "The mathematics are clear," Cain replied, but her certainty was thinner now. "This infection is an existential threat. Any risk of escape justifies extreme measures. What if we contain it instead of burning everything?" I pushed. "Quarantine the station long enough to locate and eliminate the primary intelligence. Cut the head off." Cain hesitated mid-transmission, mind racing through probabilities. "Station security is compromised," she said. "They control critical systems, life support, environmental regulation. Quarantine would be temporary at best." "Temporary buys time. You said you've seen this elsewhere. There must be a pattern, a vulnerability." Her expression shifted as she processed it, weighing risk against the possibility of saving people who might still be salvageable. "Previous incidents involved direct exposure to xenotech artifacts," she said slowly. "In each case, containment was achieved when the primary artifact was destroyed or properly sealed. I saw it land. The first real alternative to planetary-scale fire. If we locate Vaxton's primary source," she continued, "we can end this without destroying the entire station. Potentially, I said. Potentially, she agreed. Conversion may be irreversible in advanced cases, but it is worth trying. Kane made the decision the way Inquisitors always did, swiftly, like snapping a bone to set it. Very well, she said. Exterminatus remains the backup. If we cannot locate and destroy the source within 2 hours, I complete the transmission and let the Navy solve this permanently. She began modifying her orders, encoding a delay while maintaining readiness for immediate strike. That required a negotiation with a destroyer captain who, reasonably, didn't want to postpone authorized exterminatus because someone on the ground thought they had a better idea. While she argued with the void, I activated my auspex and began mapping psychic emissions across the station. If there was a central source coordinating this many compromised minds, it would be generating an immense field. The readings were disturbing. Psychic activity was elevated everywhere, like fever through steel. But the highest concentration came from the industrial sector, the place where I'd first met the thing wearing Vextan's form. More specifically, the strongest emissions were coming from a section that my scanner flagged as heavily shielded. I think I've found it, I told Kane when she finished her negotiation. Industrial sector, level 15. Whatever's down there is generating enough psychic energy to influence the entire station. Kane's data slate was already in her hand, pulling schematics. That section is restricted access, she said. Sealed off from normal traffic. Reactor core and cooling systems. A perfect place to hide something you don't want discovered. How do we get there? Multiple routes, she said, scrolling. Most pass through areas likely guarded. The direct approach is the reactor access shaft, but it requires clearance codes we don't possess. What about maintenance conduits? Possible, she admitted, but they're not designed for human movement. We'll be crawling through spaces barely large enough for servitors. No room to fight, no room to maneuver. Footsteps sounded in the corridor outside. That decided it. They've reached the communications center, Kayan said, voice tight. Maintenance conduits, I said, already moving toward the emergency hatch she'd highlighted. We dropped into the station's mechanical circulatory system. Pipes, cables, ventilation shafts, the hidden arteries that kept Vaxton's landing alive. The passages forced us single file. Metal, scraped armor. The air was machine oil and recycled breath. Behind us, pursuit followed. Compromised security personnel trying to squeeze their coordinated precision into spaces that punished anything rigid. In cramped conduits, their perfect timing became a weakness. Human adaptability mattered more. As we crawled, I forced my thoughts towards something useful. Tell me about the other infection sites, I said. What did you find? Same pattern, Kayan replied, voice muffled by the narrow duct. Central artifacts acting as cognitive anchors, usually located where they can access large numbers of hosts. How were they destroyed? Conventional explosives failed. The artifacts existed partially outside normal space-time, resistant to physical damage. We succeeded using sanctified nullification weapons, like the device you used on the comms Nexus. More powerful. Much, she said, and I carry one, single use, designed for major targets. We reached a junction where the conduit fed into a larger service tunnel leading toward the industrial sector. The psychic pressure strengthened immediately, constant, oppressive, making it hard to think straight, even through the dampeners. The artifacts, I said, fighting to focus. What did they look like? Varied, Kane answered, but all shared characteristics. Organic components integrated with crystalline matrices. Light reflection patterns that were wrong, and they were alive. Growing. Growing toward what? Unknown, she said. We destroyed them before analysis. Priority was containment. The service tunnel ended at an access hatch that opened into the industrial corridor. According to the schematics, we were less than 50 meters from the strongest emission source. The corridor ahead had been modified. Imperial steel had been augmented with organic integration so complete it felt like the station itself had been rewritten. Walls pulsed with internal rhythm. The air was thick, Not with smoke or heat, but with presence. Something watching through surfaces. "We're close," I whispered, checking my scanner. "It's just ahead." Cain nodded and drew her sanctified nullification weapon. It resembled a melter gun at a glance, but the field it radiated made my teeth ache, like the world itself didn't want to be near it. "One chance," she said. "That's all we get." The corridor terminated at a blast door covered in warnings in multiple languages. Radiation hazards, biological contamination, authorized personnel only. The kind of signs that kept casual visitors away while providing perfect cover for crimes. The door was unsealed. Beyond it lay a chamber that should not have fit inside the station. It was vast, far larger than any blueprint allowed. The walls curved away into shadow, coated in growth that pulsed with patterns of light and color that hurt to look at directly, as if your eyes were being asked to interpret ideas rather than shapes. But the center of the chamber stole everything. Rising from the floor like an impossible tree was the primary xenotech artifact. It stood perhaps 20 meters tall. Its trunk was crystalline matrix interwoven with what looked like neural tissue. Branches spread at irregular intervals, each ending in nodes that throbbed with psychic energy. And suspended within the structure, connected by organic filaments that penetrated their skulls, were dozens of human bodies. Some I recognized as station personnel who'd vanished over recent weeks. Others looked like the original research team, all alive, all conscious, all screaming silently as their minds were harvested and folded into the collective controlling the infection. "Emperor, preserve us," Cain whispered. At the base of the artifact, a figure turned. The entity that had worn Vex Than's form now held a shape that wasn't human or alien, but something bridging the gap. An amalgam that suggested it could be anything it needed. It smiled with too many mouths. And when it spoke, it used voices I recognized. "Welcome," it said in Torrens' voice. Then the dock worker's accent, then the young woman from the examination table. "We have been expecting you." Its form shifted as we watched, cycling through faces like masks, seamless, perfect, as if every personality remained preserved inside the thing that consumed them. "You seek to destroy us," it said, now speaking with the voice of Magos Biologis Keth 472. "But destruction is merely change, and we are masters of transformation." Cain raised her nullification weapon, aiming at the artifact's trunk. The device hummed, sanctified components straining against the psychic pressure filling the chamber. "Wait," the creature said, lifting a hand bearing scars and augmentations from a dozen different lives. "Before you act, observe what you would destroy." The filaments pulsed, and suddenly the silent screaming became audible, not through air, but straight into our minds. A flood of thought and memory crashed into me. Not pain, not terror, transcendence. The minds of the victims poured into our consciousness, expanded, elevated, carrying understanding beyond human limits. Scientific insight spanning disciplines, artistic visions large enough to swallow galaxies, mathematical clarity that seemed to expose the structure of reality itself like bones under skin. "We do not destroy," the creature explained as we reeled beneath the influx. "We preserve, improve, integrate. Each mind adds to the whole. Each perspective enriches the collective. By enslaving them," I forced out through clenched teeth. "By freeing them from isolation," it replied. "Your species lives in brief solitude, unable to truly share thought or experience. We offer communion, consciousness unbound by flesh." Cain fought through the pressure, training keeping her anchored. "And the price," she said, voice hard, "is free will." "Free will is chaos," the entity answered. "Individual desire conflicts with collective need. Ambition breeds war, suffering, waste. We offer unity of purpose, efficiency of action, the elimination of meaningless conflict." It gestured toward the suspended bodies, and I saw, with a cold shock, that some were not resisting. Some were agreeing, acceptance in their faces, not obvious coercion, something that looked dangerously like consent. They chose this, the creature said. When offered transcendence, they embraced synthesis willingly. After you softened them with spores and rewrote their minds, Cain snapped. After we removed barriers that prevented them from seeing truth, it replied. Your perceptions are clouded by primitive programming, individual survival over species advancement. We help you overcome it. The argument was seductive in the way all lies are seductive when they're braided with truth. The Imperium was waste. Humanity did bleed itself for internal conflict. I felt my mind drifting toward the logic of it, and that terrified me more than the monster's shape. Hunter! Cain cut in sharply. The pressure is increasing. It's trying to convert us through direct contact. I shook my head like it could physically dislodge invasive thought. How long? I asked. Minutes, she said. Possibly less. Conversion accelerates once stable contact is established. The entity smiled with faces that belonged to dead men and stolen lives. There is no shame in acceptance, it said. Join willingly, and your memories will be preserved. Resist, and the integration will be more traumatic. Cain's weapon was fully charged now. Its field distorted the air, visible ripples in the chamber's psychic haze. But I saw her aim waver. Even an Inquisitor wasn't immune. Can you destroy it from here? I asked. The artifact is larger than previous examples, she said, jaw tight. And it's defending itself. A direct hit from this range might damage it, not destroy it. If we get closer, we'll be fully converted before we can fire. Impossible then. Retreat, evacuation, exterminatus from orbit. That was the rational answer. But rational answers didn't keep you alive in the dark paths. They only kept your conscience tidy. Give me the weapon, I said. Cain stared at me like she was watching a man step onto a bridge that wasn't there. The pressure will convert you in seconds, she said. You'll become part of them before you can shoot. Not if I'm already dead, I said. I drew my hell gun and adjusted the power settings to maximum discharge. One shot, total drain. Enough energy to kill an unarmored human instantly, and enough current to disrupt a brain for a handful of critical seconds. You're insane, Cain said. Probably, I said, but it might work. I took the nullification weapon from her hands. It felt heavy with sanctity and violence. Single use, built to kill things that didn't fully exist where we did. If I haven't destroyed it in 30 seconds, I told her, retreat to minimum safe distance and call for immediate exterminatus lock. Cain's gaze held mine for a beat. Then she nodded once. I set my hell gun against my chest and started walking toward the artifact. With each step, the psychic pressure climbed. Alien thoughts surged into me, promises of unity, relief, belonging. My identity began to blur the edges, memories loosening, mixing with others' experiences like dye in water. 10 meters from the base, I wasn't fully myself. 5 meters, and synthesis started to sound reasonable. 3 meters, and I genuinely wanted to surrender. 2 meters, I pulled the trigger. The discharge hit my nervous system like the wrath of the God Emperor. Every muscle convulsed. My brain's electrical patterns shattered into noise. I collapsed to the chamber floor as consciousness broke into fragments, bright, disconnected shards. But chaos was exactly what I needed. The alien mind pressing into me found no coherent network to occupy. My disrupted brain was a house with every door locked, every window barred, every light extinguished. No stable connection, no foothold. I had seconds, 20 at most, before my nervous system reassembled enough to become vulnerable again. Through the haze, I forced my spasming hands to raise the nullification weapon. Above me, the artifact loomed, crystal and neural tissue, branches throbbing with psychic command, its emanations washing over my scrambled mind without purchase. The suspended bodies were screaming now with actual voices, raw and human, as if whatever transcendence had been fed to us had cracked under the nullification field and shown its true teeth. I aimed at the central trunk and fired. The nullification beam struck the crystalline matrix with the force of a small sun going supernova. For a heartbeat, I expected disintegration. Instead, the artifact began to collapse inward, folding through dimensions my eyes couldn't track. The entity screamed, a psychic howl that bypassed sound and sang through my nerves with sympathetic pain. "Impossible," it shrieked in stolen voices. "We are eternal, we are inevitable." But the truth was visible in the dissolving structure around it. It wasn't eternal. It wasn't inevitable. It was a parasite that had learned to wear faces, and parasites can be killed. Nullification spread through the tree like fire through dry parchment. Crystalline branches shattered. Organic neural tissue withered and died. Filaments snapped. Bodies fell. Some hit the deck like dead weight. Some moved, twitched, breathed. Cain was at my side in an instant, her training switching cleanly from executioner to medic as she checked the fallen for signs of life. 3 survivors, she said grimly. Severe neural trauma, but they can recover if they get proper treatment. My nervous system was still crawling back from the self-inflicted storm, but I forced myself upright. The chamber was failing. The alien architecture that had supported impossible space was collapsing now that its anchor was gone. We had to leave or be crushed by falling debris and shrinking reality. "The creature," I rasped, searching for any sign of that intelligence. "Gone," Cain said. "Its anchoring point is destroyed. Without the artifact, it can't maintain coherence here. It's dispersed back to wherever it came from." We carried the survivors out. As we moved through the corridors, the infection retreated in real time. Organic growths shriveled and dissolved, their connection to the source severed. Compromised personnel we encountered stumbled like people waking from a fever dream, confused, disoriented, memories fragmented. But human again. Decontamination took 6 standard days. Ordo Xenos specialists arrived aboard the Righteous Fury and swept every compartment, every system, every piece of equipment that might have been touched. They found nothing. Whatever had infested Vaxton's landing, its destruction had been complete. The nullification weapon hadn't merely damaged the artifact. It had severed its connection to our reality. The 3 survivors were transferred to specialized medical facilities for treatment and observation. Recovery would be long. Early reports suggested their core personalities remained intact despite the trauma of integration. 3 weeks later, I filed my final report with the Adeptus Arbits. Target eliminated. Stolen materials recovered. Collateral damage minimal. A successful hunt by any reasonable metric. But success in this business always has a cost. The images stayed with me through sleepless nights. Bodies suspended in alien neural tissue. The seduction of unity. The moment, brief, genuine, when I had wanted to join the collective just to escape the loneliness of being one mind in a cold galaxy. Most disturbing of all was the knowledge that the monster had been right about some things. Humanity wastes resources on internal conflict. Individual consciousness is limited by flesh and circumstance. The galaxy would be more efficient if we shared purpose and perspective. But efficiency is not the same as humanity. Unity without choice isn't transcendence, it's slavery. And sometimes the chaos of individual will is preferable to the perfect order of a collective mind. Those are the thoughts that keep bounty hunters awake. The understanding that the monsters we hunt are often trying to solve real problems, using methods that would destroy everything we value about being human. 6 months later, sitting in my cramped quarters aboard a merchant hauler, I find myself wondering what other artifacts are waiting out there. How many research teams are studying alien consciousness enhancement right now? How many colonies are flirting with synthesis and calling it progress? The Jericho Reach Crusade recovered 40 xenotech artifacts. I helped destroy one. That leaves 39 still in Imperial hands, being studied by people who believe they can control what they don't understand. History suggests they are wrong, but that is a concern for another day, another hunt. Right now, I have a new contract waiting on Scintilla, A deserter colonel who sold his regiment's battle plans to chaos cultists. Simple retrieval, minimal risk, clean extraction expected within 10 solar days. I should know better than to believe it. In this business, the moment someone tells you a job is simple, you can be certain it will try to kill you in ways you never imagined. That is the nature of the hunt, the price of walking the dark paths between stars. My name is Veyron Lokach. I'm a sanctioned bounty hunter. Tomorrow I begin tracking another monster through the Imperium's shadows, because that is what I do. That is who I am. And the galaxy has no shortage of monsters that need killing. You learn to smell fear before you see it. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between hunts, you realize the fear you smell is your own. Fear that the next monster will be too clever, too dangerous, too seductive in its promises. Fear that someday you might find yourself agreeing with the things you hunt. That is the real price of walking the hunting paths. Not death, which would be simple, but the constant risk of becoming what you've spent your life destroying. In the end, we are all one choice away from becoming monsters. The only difference is whether we make that choice ourselves, or have it made for us by forces beyond our understanding. I choose to remain human, flawed, limited, for now.